Hello everyone, welcome to the M.O.W channel today. Today, we'll begin our discussion with a mystery case from the past, the B Cooper Hijacking, one of the most famous and long-standing unsolved cases in American history. Before you begin, please subscribe and like. Let's get started. November 24, 1971, was a time when air travel in the United States was experiencing its golden age. Ironically, however, it was also the peak era of aircraft hijackings, or skyjackings. From the early 1960s to the early 1970s, over 150 commercial aircraft were hijacked in the U.S., most driven by political motives, such as demands for asylum in Cuba or other countries. Airport security at the time was a far cry from today's stringent measures. Metal detectors and ID checks were not mandatory, and passengers typically boarded planes after only a simple ticket verification. B Cooper exploited precisely these gaps in the system. What set the Cooper case apart from previous hijackings was his motive. Unlike others, he did not seek to broadcast a political message or demand asylum. He wanted only money and a way to escape. This represented a type of crime the federal authorities had never confronted before. The case would become more than just a singular crime. It marked a turning point in the history of American aviation security. On the afternoon of November 24, 1971, at Portland International Airport, a man approached the Northwest Orient Airlines ticket counter. He identified himself as Dan Cooper, dressed in a businessman's attire typical of the era: a black suit, white shirt, and black clip-on tie, neatly knotted. In his mid-40s, standing about 6 feet tall, with olive-toned skin and neatly combed black hair, he made a calm and courteous impression on M.O.W, the flight attendant who would become the only person to converse with him at length on board. His excessively ordinary appearance was, in fact, the perfect disguise. Cooper purchased a one-way ticket for $18.52 in cash, a common practice at the time. He took seat 18C on flight 305. As he waited for takeoff, he smoked a cigarette and ordered bourbon and soda, showing no sign of nervousness. The flight, carrying 36 passengers and 6 crew members, took off northward from Portland. No one could have guessed that this seemingly unremarkable man would soon engage the U.S. government in a daring negotiation. Once the plane reached cruising altitude, Cooper set the first stage of his plan in motion. He called for M.O.W, a new flight attendant, and handed her a note written hastily in pen. "I have a bomb in my briefcase. Sit with me." Initially, M.O.W thought it was a prank by a mischievous businessman, but Cooper quietly and firmly said, "Young lady, I'd like you to understand that I am serious about this threat." He then slightly opened the brown attaché case on his lap to reveal its contents: bundles of wires, a large battery, and 6 red cylindrical sticks neatly arranged. The visual proof instantly transformed M.O.W's skepticism into fear. Cooper then instructed M.O.W to record his detailed demands. Throughout this process, he remained remarkably calm and polite. He asked if she was cold and even offered her a drink. His abnormal composure reassured the crew that he was mentally stable and in full control of his actions. This calm professionalism exerted a psychological pressure on both the airline and the FBI, compelling them to comply with his demands. During the early phase of the hijacking, Cooper's demands were immediately relayed to Captain William Scott, who notified Northwest Orient Airlines Operations Center and the FBI's Seattle field office. The FBI assigned the case the codename Northwest Hijacking and launched an immediate response. His demands were straightforward: $200,000 in cash, all in unmarked $20 bills, with consecutive serial numbers allowing the FBI to track the money later. 4 parachutes, 2 main and 2 reserve. Prioritizing passenger safety, authorities decided to meet Cooper's demands in full. Chaos erupted at Seattle's SeaTac Airport. FBI agents scrambled to gather $200,000 and $20 bills from nearby banks, meticulously recording serial numbers on microfilm, a time-consuming process. Simultaneously, a local skydiving school rushed to supply 4 military-grade parachutes. Flight 305 circled over Seattle for about 2 hours, awaiting ground preparations. The delay heightened tension aboard the plane, but Cooper remained in complete control, confident that every move on the ground was fulfilling his requirements. This suggested a sophisticated knowledge of airline procedures and even logistical operations. Finally, around 7:40 p.m., once everything was ready, Flight 305 landed at Seattle-Tacoma International Airport. The aircraft was guided to a dark, isolated area of the tarmac, where dozens of FBI agents and snipers were positioned discreetly to avoid alerting Cooper. After ensuring that a refueling truck was in place, Cooper demanded that only a single unarmed agent deliver the cash and parachutes. The FBI complied, sending one airline employee or agent with the money and parachutes to the rear airstair. Once Cooper verified the delivery, he released the 35 remaining passengers all but himself. Most exited the plane in haste, barely comprehending the unfolding drama. Only Cooper and 4 crew members, including Captain Scott, remained on board. Cooper instructed the captain to fly toward Mexico City, specifying altitude below 10,000 feet, speed 100 knots, and with the rear airstair lowered, clear evidence that he was preparing for a jump into the darkness. Having completed the first phase of his hijacking, Dan Cooper refueled the aircraft and took off again, with the crew as hostages, disappearing into the night sky over Washington state. The stage was set for what would become the boldest escape in American history. The fact that B Cooper specifically chose a Boeing 727 to hijack Northwest Orient Airlines Flight 305 suggests that his crime was far from impulsive. While the 727 was a common mid-range airliner in the 1960s and 70s, for Cooper, it was the perfect escape tool. The key was the aircraft's rear airstair, a stairway door at the back of the plane. Most passenger aircraft doors are located at the wings or front fuselage and are designed never to open in flight. The 727's rear airstair, however, was engineered for rapid boarding and disembarking on the ground, and could be mechanically released by the crew. While the plane was airborne, Cooper knew this deadly design flaw all too well. He even understood that, thanks to the T-tail configuration of the 727, a parachutist could jump from the airstair without striking the jet engines or tail surfaces. This technical knowledge strongly suggests that he may have been an aircraft mechanic, a crew member, or a highly trained military operative. After refueling in Seattle, Cooper used this vulnerability to orchestrate the second leg of his flight toward Mexico City, moving the stage of the mystery over the skies of Washington state. Once airborne from Seattle, Flight 305 followed Cooper's precise and demanding flight parameters. Altitude below 10,000 feet, approximately 3,000 meters. Speed no more than 100 knots, about 185 km/h. Close to the minimum speed at which the 727 could safely fly without stalling. Flaps set to 15 degrees to maximize lift and maintain a low speed. Landing gear lowered. Cabin pressure kept at the minimum level. These conditions created the safest possible scenario for a mid-air jump. An altitude below 10,000 feet reduced the risk of oxygen deprivation, while the 100-knot speed minimized G-force impact on a deployed parachute. Cooper's meticulous instructions revealed both significant skydiving experience and a solid understanding of aerodynamics. Captain Scott knew that two U.S. Air Force F-106 interceptors were tracking the plane discreetly, but with Cooper completely isolating the cockpit and controlling all onboard decisions, the pilots had no choice but to comply. The second leg took the aircraft off standard Northwest flight routes, over the rugged, mountainous terrain of southwestern Washington state. Cooper had 4 parachutes in his possession. The FBI had attempted a trap during the delivery of the ransom. One of the parachutes was a dummy, sewn shut so it could never deploy, while another was functional but outdated, intended for training purposes. These measures were meant to test whether Cooper was truly a parachuting expert and to mitigate potential danger. Calmly, Cooper inspected the parachutes, checking their release mechanisms with the expertise of a professional. He selected 2 underwear and 1 to secure the $200,000 ransom to his body. This is where he appears to have made a critical error. He wore the parachute that looked the newest, and dismantled one of the older units to use its risers to attach the money bag to his waist. Investigators later suggested that the risers he used may have come from the dummy parachute, whose canvas was intentionally defective. An even greater mystery remains whether the parachute he wore was fully functional. If Cooper were a true expert, he likely would have recognized the subtle stitching flaws or release handle type that marked a training chute. His equipment choices indicate that, while his knowledge of aviation was considerable, he either lacked practical experience with actual skydiving gear or made a fatal misjudgment under pressure. As Flight 305 passed over the border region of the Columbia River and the Cascade Mountains, Cooper finalized his escape preparations. He instructed the remaining 4 crew members to return to the cockpit and not to look back. M.O.W, who had interacted most closely with him, would later provide the only eyewitness account of his final moments on board. Maintaining his gentlemanly demeanor, Cooper told M.O.W, "I'm fine." As she returned to the cockpit, a tense silence followed. She later testified that around 8:13 p.m., she heard a sudden movement and the hiss of air from the rear of the cabin. That sound marked Cooper releasing the airstair in the howling wind and rain. The cockpit warning lights indicated that the rear door was open, and the pilots could feel slight vibrations from the tail. He had successfully deployed the airstair. Moments later, the warning lights went off, either because the airstair snapped back into position or became inoperable due to the wind. B Cooper had vanished into the darkness, taking $200,000 with him. At the moment of his jump, Flight 305 was being shadowed by two F-106 fighters from McChord Air Force Base. Their mission was to visually track Cooper and report his landing zone to the FBI, but it was nighttime, and thick storm clouds and heavy rain over Washington state made visibility nearly impossible. The fighters, which had to fly faster than the 727, struggled to maintain tracking with erratic S-turns at the plane's slow speed. They never saw Cooper leave the aircraft, and radar offered no clue to his whereabouts. The crew continued southward, never able to rule out the possibility that he remained on board. When Flight 305 landed at its next stop in Reno, FBI agents swarmed the aircraft and conducted a thorough search. They recovered Cooper's clip-on tie, cigarette butts, and the dismantled parachute components, but nothing else. B Cooper had literally vanished into thin air, disappearing into the 1971 night. His audacious leap became an unprecedented event in aviation history, marking the beginning of one of the greatest unsolved mysteries of all time. Immediately after B Cooper jumped from Northwest Flight 305, the U.S. federal government launched an unprecedented large-scale ground search operation. The search focused on the remote southwestern regions of Washington state, particularly the rugged mountainous areas around Lake Merwin and La Center. These areas, part of the Cascade Range's tributaries, featured dense pine forests, steep valleys, and harsh winter storms, making access extremely difficult. The FBI mobilized hundreds of Army, Air Force personnel, and civilian volunteers. The initial search, conducted from late fall through winter of 1971, lasted roughly 45 days and was marked by frustration and despair. Soldiers formed long lines, dragging their feet through the forest, while helicopters and military aircraft conducted aerial sweeps. Despite their efforts, no trace of Cooper's body, parachute, or the $200,000 ransom bag was ever found. The wild terrain of southwestern Washington seemed to have swallowed him whole. The search's difficulty was not just due to terrain. Early investigators incorrectly assumed that Cooper had jumped at a speed of 175 knots, which likely caused the initial search zones to miss the actual drop site. Later, when the FBI collaborated with Boeing experts to recalculate the plane's speed and wind conditions, they determined that the true jump point was much farther south than originally believed. By then, however, valuable time had passed, and seasonal conditions only made the search more challenging. This massive search's failure became a pivotal factor that cemented the case as an unsolved mystery and fueled the legend that Cooper had escaped perfectly. Although the ground search failed, a small number of items Cooper left aboard Flight 305 were preserved at the FBI's Seattle office. Among these, the most important and intriguing was a J.C. Penney clip-on tie he removed just before jumping. Decades later, in the mid-2000s, advances in forensic technology allowed the tie to be reanalyzed. Scientists and the FBI discovered over 100,000 microscopic particles embedded in the fabric. Analysis revealed not ordinary dust, but traces of rare metals such as titanium, bismuth, and strontium sulfide. Some of these materials, like titanium alloys, are commonly used in specialized manufacturing processes or the aerospace industry. This scientific finding provided a significant clue about Cooper's identity. He was likely not an ordinary criminal, but someone with a professional background such as aerospace or electronics industry worker. The microscopic particles on the tie could have been picked up while working in an aircraft manufacturing facility or subcontractor site, such as Boeing. Chemist or technician familiarity with specialized metals and chemical processes. The tie also became a source for DNA analysis. Several DNA samples were extracted, with one designated as primary DNA. This sample was compared to numerous suspects over the years, but to date, no individual has been officially identified as a match for B Cooper. The small clip-on tie offered new insight into his professional background, but deepened the mystery of his true identity. In addition to the tie, the FBI attempted to collect fingerprints and cigarette butts left by Cooper on board. However, fingerprint collection proved difficult. He appeared careful not to leave prints on cups or cans, and most of the partial prints recovered belonged to airline employees or crew members, providing no meaningful leads. During the early stages of the investigation, the FBI focused on creating and distributing a composite sketch of Cooper. Based on testimonies from flight attendants Tina Mucklow and Florence Schaffner, the sketch emphasized his sharp nose, neatly combed hair, and thick eyebrows. Following the release of the sketch, The FBI received countless tips and investigated over 800 suspects over 5 years. Among the most serious was Richard Floyd McCoy Jr. McCoy hijacked a plane in a remarkably similar manner just 4 months after the Cooper case. However, the FBI concluded he was not Cooper, citing discrepancies in height, weight, and crucially, the composite sketch. McCoy was officially classified as a copycat. The FBI's early investigative conclusions essentially boiled down to two possibilities. Cooper died during the jump. He may have worn a training parachute, jumped at night in poor weather, and was dressed in formal attire, ill-suited for a parachute jump, making survival highly unlikely. Cooper was a professional with military or aviation knowledge, but inexperienced in parachuting. The precise flight instructions contrasted with his misjudgment in parachute selection, revealing contradictory skill sets. These conflicting pieces of evidence caused the investigation to stall for decades, leaving the case as a quintessential unsolved mystery. Equally fascinating is how the hijacker's name became legendary. Cooper identified himself as Dan Cooper, which appeared on his ticket. However, early media reports mistakenly conflated him with another suspect, investigated by the FBI as D. B. Cooper. One journalist erroneously used the initials D. B., and the name quickly spread, becoming the hijacker's de facto alias. The moniker D. B. captured the public imagination and elevated Cooper to a mythic figure. A minor journalistic error became an official cultural shorthand for the case, linking the mystery of his disappearance to the collective imagination. For over 45 years. In 2016, the FBI officially closed the D. B. Cooper case, reallocating resources to other pressing investigations. After 45 years, the Bureau concluded that no evidence has emerged to prove Cooper survived. Yet the closure of the investigation does not signify the end of the story. All physical evidence remains permanently preserved at the FBI's Seattle office, including the clip-on tie, the cut parachute risers, the ticket, and microfilm records of the ransom bills. The FBI holds onto these items with the hope that future technological advances, particularly in DNA analysis and rare particle forensics, may one day yield new clues. For decades, D. B. Cooper's evidence has remained silent, awaiting the day it might finally reveal the truth, leaving his case as a living mystery in the annals of American forensic history. 9 years had passed since D. B. Cooper leapt into the pitch-black night. In November 1971, the FBI's massive search operation had long been suspended, and the case was slowly being buried in the files of unsolved crimes. Public interest had waned, and most investigators concluded that Cooper had likely perished in the rugged mountains of southwestern Washington. His name seemed destined to remain only a footnote in history, a minor trigger for strengthened airline security regulations. Yet in February 1980, this long silence was dramatically broken in the most unexpected way. Along the northern bank of the Columbia River near Vancouver, Washington, at a riverside area known as Tina Bar, a family was camping. 8-year-old Brian Ingram, digging in the sand to start a campfire, uncovered something buried in the mud. Half submerged in dirt and sand were 3 bundles of cash, still held together with decayed rubber bands. Brian's father, H. Dwayne Ingram, immediately reported the discovery to the authorities, and the find was quickly relayed to the FBI's Seattle office. Agents arrived to collect the cash. The total amounted to $5,800, composed entirely of $20 bills. The notes were waterlogged, mud-stained, badly damaged, and covered with mold. Fortunately, the FBI had retained microfilm records of all $10,020 bills issued as ransom in 1971. For the first time, nearly 9 years later, these records were put to use. After meticulous comparison, the FBI confirmed that every single bill in the $5,800 matched the serial numbers of the ransom paid to D. B. Cooper. This was the first and only verified piece of physical evidence in the long history of the case. The money had indeed been delivered to Cooper, and had either been lost or hidden after his escape. The discovery proved that the crime was not entirely perfect, and that Cooper had not successfully escaped with the full ransom. This $5,800 breathed new life into the case, and compelled the FBI to officially reopen the investigation. However, rather than solving the mystery, the discovery created a more complex geographical puzzle. Jump site versus discovery site. The FBI's final estimated jump site was near the upper reaches of the Lewis River. Tina Bar, where the money was found, lay more than 20 miles, approximately 32 kilometers downstream along the Columbia River. Secrets of the sediment. The bills were not lying on a sandbar, but buried deep within sediment layers. Leonard Palmer, a geologist at Portland State University, determined that the money had been deposited beneath sediment layers that had accumulated before 1974. This suggested that the bills might have been carried by the massive 1972 flood of the Columbia River, buried along the way. This hydrological puzzle split investigators into two camps. Supporting Cooper's death if the money had floated downstream from the jump site, Cooper may have died shortly after his leap or lost the cash during the escape. The 1972 flood could have swept the ransom from the Lewis River into the Columbia, ultimately burying it at Tina Bar. Reigniting Cooper's survival theory. Some amateur detectives and investigators argued that Cooper might have returned later to retrieve the money. Perhaps he had hidden the bulk of the cash, but accidentally left $5,800 behind or misjudged the burial site after the flood. If the bills were deposited in sediment downstream, the early search theory that Cooper fell into the forest with the parachute became less certain. Ultimately, the discovery of the $5,800 fundamentally challenged the FBI's original assumptions about Cooper's jump site and added another layer to the case's geographical complexity. Following the find, the FBI and local authorities conducted a renewed search of Tina Bar and surrounding areas along the Columbia River. Divers scoured the riverbed, and geologists analyzed the sediment. Yet the remaining $194,200 was never recovered. The fate of the rest of the ransom has inspired multiple theories. Successful recovery. Cooper may have retrieved the bulk of the money and used it to support his survival. Buried elsewhere, he may have distributed the cash in multiple hiding spots, with the rest still buried and undiscovered. Lost to the river, the remainder may have been swept into the Pacific or permanently buried in deep river sediment. The $5,800 provided no decisive answer regarding Cooper's survival. If he died, where did the rest of the money go? If he lived, how did he avoid detection while using such a large sum? The find offered the FBI a brief glimmer of hope, only to plunge the case back into an unsolvable maze. Beyond its investigative value, the $5,800 symbolized the only tangible connection between the legend of D.B. Cooper and the real world. Brian Ingram, the young boy who stumbled upon it, instantly became a national figure, and the cash he discovered became a central piece of evidence in every documentary and book on the case. Some of the bills Brian found were kept by the FBI as evidence, while a few of the damaged notes were returned to his family as keepsakes. The discovery reignited public imagination, cementing the story not merely as a crime, but as eternal folklore of the American Northwest. The sands of the Columbia River know nothing of the secrets Cooper left behind in 1971. The $5,800 stands as a final taunt from the man himself, a silent testament to the audacity of his escape and the enduring mystery of his fate. The Columbia River continues to keep its secrets, both the remainder of the ransom and the whereabouts of D.B. Cooper, deep within its silent, flowing waters. The D.B. Cooper case has been one of the FBI's longest and most persistent investigations. Since it occurred in 1971, the Bureau assigned the case the code name Northwest Hijacking and dedicated extensive resources and personnel to it for 45 years. Yet, in July 2016, the FBI officially announced it would no longer actively pursue the investigation. The FBI emphasized that this decision did not mean the case was closed or unsolvable. Rather, it was a practical acknowledgement of the limitations of the evidence and the absence of new leads. Resources previously devoted to Nordic were redirected toward higher priority areas, such as counterterrorism and cybercrime, which had surged in importance after 9/11. Nordic thus transitioned from an active field investigation to a historical record preserved in the Seattle FBI evidence vault. Over 4.5 decades, the FBI compiled an enormous file, containing the names of hundreds of suspects and the reasons they were eliminated, as well as the scientific evidence from Cooper's tie in the ransom bills. While the Bureau's final decision effectively concluded the case from a legal standpoint, it opened a new chapter for public fascination, amateur investigators, scientists, and historians eager to explore the legend of D.B. Cooper. Among the hundreds of suspects investigated over the years, a few came close to matching Cooper's profile. Yet all were ultimately eliminated, primarily due to DNA evidence from the J.C. Penney clip-on tie. The most scientifically significant piece of evidence left by Cooper, a Richard Floyd McCoy Jr. similarity. Just 4 months after the Cooper hijacking, McCoy hijacked a Boeing 727, demanded $500,000, and parachuted from the aircraft. A Vietnam War veteran and former Green Beret, he was highly skilled in parachute jumps. Elimination. The FBI determined that McCoy's appearance did not match Cooper, nor did the flight attendants' descriptions. Testimony suggested McCoy would not have committed a crime on Thanksgiving for religious reasons. Most importantly, His DNA did not match the tie. The Bureau concluded McCoy was a copycat to mimic Cooper's methods. B. Kenneth Christensen. Similarity: a former Northwest Orient Airlines flight attendant, whose appearance closely resembled Cooper's composite sketch. He showed signs of sudden wealth, such as purchasing land with cash in 1972. Elimination: despite being a strong suspect among amateur investigators, Christensen's height and build. Cooper was 6 feet. He was 5 feet 8 inches, did not match descriptions, and DNA analysis excluded him. Furthermore, microscopic particle analysis from the tie suggested exposure to aerospace materials, which Christensen had no direct connection to. C. Wayne Weber. Similarity: shortly before his death in 1995, Weber allegedly confessed to his wife that he was D.B. Cooper. His appearance resembled the composite sketch, and he had criminal experience and local knowledge of Washington state. Elimination: DNA testing ultimately ruled him out, as suspects were excluded. The J.C. Penney clip-on tie remained the most scientifically valuable evidence. Analysis of the tie revealed rare metallic particles that provided more insight into Cooper's professional background than his identity. Titanium and specialized alloys: microscopic particles, including titanium, bismuth, and strontium sulfide, were commonly used in jet engine components, specialized machining, and military aerospace laboratory environments in the early 1970s. Conclusion: these findings strongly suggest that D.B. Cooper was not an ordinary individual but someone with advanced technical knowledge, who likely had access to high-tech manufacturing or aerospace facilities in the Pacific Northwest. The tie redefined Cooper as a skilled engineer or technician, not a reckless jumper. One of Cooper's most enduring legacies is the impact he had on U.S. and global aviation safety, by exploiting a design flaw that allowed the rear airstair of a Boeing 727 to be opened mid-flight. Cooper forced the Federal Aviation Administration (FAA) to mandate the installation of the Cooper vane on all 727 aircraft. Function: the Cooper vane is a mechanical lock that automatically engages when the aircraft's landing gear retracts. It prevents the rear airstair from being operated in flight, making mid-air escapes like Cooper's permanently impossible. Legacy: this device stands as the most concrete physical trace Cooper left on aviation history. Thanks to the Cooper vane, in-flight escapes via rear stairs have virtually disappeared since 1971. Ironically, Cooper may have executed a perfect escape, but he also ensured that no one could ever repeat it. With the FBI's case closure and the tie providing only clues to his professional background, D.B. Cooper has transcended his role as a mere criminal. He has become a cultural icon and a fixture of American folklore. The reasons his story continues to captivate people are clear. A perfect escape: Cooper vanished with most of the ransom, evading both the FBI and the best technology of his era. A contradictory character: he was polite, treated flight attendants with courtesy, and projected an image that was simultaneously ruthless and, paradoxically, anti-authoritarian. He became a symbol of public fascination with rebellion against authority and systems. The absence of conclusive evidence aside from the $5,800 discovered years later, no definitive clues explain his fate. This has spawned countless theories, from romantic notions that he survived and is spending the money somewhere, to the realistic idea that he died during the jump. The mystery of D.B. Cooper remains one of 20th century America's greatest unsolved cases. His identity continues to inspire books, movies, documentaries, and online forums. Even though the FBI officially closed the case, D.B. Cooper endures as a living legend, a shadowy outsider who claimed ultimate freedom and continues to ignite the imagination of generations of Americans. That's the story for today. What do you think is the truth? If there's a case you'd like me to cover next, please let me know. I'll turn it into a video and update you. I'll be back tomorrow. Stay happy.